you will grow and reach a higher level of yourself, a higher version of yourself, to the extent that you engage in activities and have experiences that make you forget yourself. Now let's make this make sense. Most of you are familiar with the flow state, the concept of the flow state as one of the highest states of human consciousness that a human can reach without the assistance of psychoactive substances. Another state of similar sort is the peak experience. The flow state was defined by the positive psychologist Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, and the peak experience a couple of decades earlier was defined by Abraham Maslow, one of the greatest humanistic psychologists and in general one of the greatest psychologists of the 20th century. The peak experience is a higher level of a state than the flow state. The peak experience is almost a mystical, like transcendental experience. However, why we are mentioning these two is because both the flow state and the peak experience, as some of the highest states of human consciousness, they have a lot of things in common. They're not exactly the same, but they have a lot of things in common. And one of the main things they have in common is that in the flow state or during the peak experience, you forget yourself. Both Maslow and Csikszentmihalyi talked about this as self-forgetfulness or the loss of self-consciousness. So it's not the loss of consciousness, but loss of self-consciousness, meaning loss of self-judgment or loss of the capacity and ability to judge yourself. Not being preoccupied with yourself, not being preoccupied with the old narrative of who you are and who you should be. In a moment or for a moment, completely dismissing the idea of who you are, forgetting yourself and being fully immersed in an activity. Another way to look at this is that a lot of people who experience the flow state or reach the peak experience, they talk about being one with the activity, one with the instrument, one with the horse that they are riding, one with the painting that they are creating, one with the piece of music that they are listening to, not necessarily playing. So that is that self-forgetfulness. Now, why is this important? How does this create an opportunity for you to reach a higher level or version of yourself? How can self-forgetfulness lead to self-growth? It seems paradoxical, but this is a paradox of the flow state and the peak experience, where you come out on the other side of these states and experiences with a strengthened and heightened sense of self in a healthy way, not in a self-absorbed, arrogant way, but in a healthy way. Why is this the case? Well, if you're constantly preoccupied with yourself, you're not allowed to imagine the possibilities of what you could be outside of the narrative that you've been imprisoned by. No matter how healthy that narrative might seem, it still is a box. It still has its limitations. While in the flow state and the peak experience, when you forget yourself, when you don't have the capacity to think about how crooked your nose is, or how you embarrassed yourself a couple of days ago in front of colleagues, or how your parents imposed certain demands and expectations on you. When you cannot think of those things because you literally don't have the capacity to think about those things because of how immersed you are, then the doors or the window to your higher nature is opened. And Maslow talked about this. He said that you get a glimpse into your true higher nature during the peak experience. And it's peak experience for a reason. It cannot be sustained forever. But when we return back to the earth, to put it that way, we carry something from this experience with us. And what we carry with us is greater love for life, appreciation for what life has to offer, and also we carry this glimpse into our true higher nature. We also carry many different things that Maslow talked about, that is the appreciation of oneness, that is us being part of the whole, which is something that a lot of Eastern traditions talk about. So that's why peak experience is sort of a mystical experience, but we have this to some extent in the flow state as well. We have the self-forgetfulness that leaves us at the very least with a strengthened sense of self, because in the moment of being fully immersed in an activity, we are allowed once again to remove those limitations of what we currently are and what we should be according to mommy and daddy and religion and school and society. All of that drops in the moment when you are in the flow state, which a lot of you, or I would argue all of you, experienced at some point. The contrast is self-absorption. The contrast is I always have to be in full control of my environment, in full control of the narrative of who I am, and I have to maintain this narrative. And this is how most people live. This is how most people live every day of their life. Because this is not an attack on those people, or most people. It's a fact about how our society functions. We need this to some extent. We need conformity to some extent for the society to function the way it does function. But one price that we pay is that a lot of people go throughout their lives, or move through their lives, always worrying about how they're going to be perceived by others. That's literally the opposite of the flow state and the peak experience. That is being fully imprisoned and trapped in the narrative of the current self, not having the capacity to think about the highest or at least higher possibilities. Now, how do we make this practical? Well, the flow state and the peak experience are accessible to all of us. Now, one important difference is that the flow state is something that we can reach more easily, and it's more in our control, because the flow state depends highly on the structure of an activity. I made videos about the flow state. I will make another video detailing everything, or almost everything there is to be said about the practical implications of the flow state. But for now, in order to stick to the main point of self-forgetfulness leading to self-growth, let's say the flow state is, we have a greater control over the flow state because it's highly dependent on the structure of the activity. While the peak experience, because it's more intense, it's a transcendental, almost mystical experience, is something that we don't have a great control over, because it doesn't depend so much on the structure. It's more so our attitude, our receptiveness, and the environment that we spend time in. Not just external environment, although that counts very much, it's also the environment of our mind and of our heart, or we could say soul. A couple of videos back, or maybe last week, I'm making videos daily, so I'm kind of losing track of things. I talked about Maslow's idea of the B realm and the D realm, realm of being and realm of deficiency. And I talked about how we have to try to spend more time in the B realm. We cannot spend all of our time in it, but if you do spend more time in the B realm, you are more receptive of the peak experience. Let's stop at that, because that's another whole thread. The point being, activities, environments, music, art, people that have in the past allowed you to get into the flow state or the peak experience. And if you're struggling to figure out if you previously had flow state or peak experience, think about those moments when you lost your sense of self, when you lost track of time, when you stopped all the internal self-judgment, when you were fully immersed in an activity, a person, a piece of art. So identify people, activities, environments, landscapes, pieces of art that facilitated the flow state or the peak experience for you. Because those activities and other things that I listed, to prevent myself from listing them again, they are your gateway to getting a glimpse into your higher nature, into your true nature. They are your gateway into dropping the shackles of the limitations that you carry naturally as part of being a human in the society. You carry these limitations with you. It's normal. But these things that facilitate and increase your chances of reaching the flow state or the peak experience, they allow you to, at least for a moment, drop those shackles, those limitations, Get out of the box that you've been placed in by the society, by parents, by school, religion, by your environment. You're allowed to get outside of that box, get a glimpse into who you can be, see your highest possibilities, feel your highest possibilities. And even though you have to get back into the real world, you carry that sense with you. So a moment of self-forgetfulness leads to a sustained feeling of a stronger self, which leads hopefully to you taking action to furthering this development of this stronger, higher self. So once again, look at the things, experiences, people that allowed you to forget yourself so that you could move towards a higher, greater, true version of yourself. Thank you.